One. All right. Hi there, and welcome to It's All Speechy. This is Natalie, and we have Virginia Ingram here. Oh, I'm sorry. Is that how you say your last name?
Yeah, Ingram.
Ingram? Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. So, hi there. It's Natalie from It's All Speechy, and we have Virginia Ingram here to talk to us all about digital literacy, and how kind of our life changed about 2 years ago, and how this has become such a relevant part of our field. Welcome, Virginia.
Well, thank you for having me, Natalie. I'm excited to be here on one of your first episodes. Thank you.
I know, it's so exciting. Um, how about we just start off, like, kind of tell everyone, like, what you do or kind of how you got to where you are right now.
Yeah, so I started working in technology in 1998, so a long time ago. And I worked at the first high speed sort of internet company in New York City.
Oh,
And everything at that time that I was working on was reliant upon people having high speed internet access. But that's when most of the world was on AOL, the big CDs. So it was a
yep.
very successful business. We went under.
They were doing great.
So, yeah, they're no longer around. But it was actually a really interesting time because, like, in the 90s in tech, the whole sort of thing about like the people that were designing the internet, they didn't care what people wanted; they just cared what they could do. And so the idea was like you create something and people will just want it if it's a good idea. Like we can make the demand later, or we can make money later. We just need to get the idea out there, right?
Yeah.
So I worked in tech. So that was a long time ago, 20 something years ago, and I've worked in tech that whole time. And so like through like the teens, like the 20 teens, like when we were talking about like designing things on the internet and making things be more about consumer goals and about like focusing on the quarter. And then sort of like as we started to get more sophisticated with the internet, it became more about sort of designing the internet for individuals that have disabilities, because we were thinking that technology was this great sort of equalizer. But then, like, as we started to go through that, we were realizing that technology really was not a great equalizer. In fact, it was actually just making the digital divide bigger. And so,
Oh gosh, yeah.
I guess, yeah. And so, like, I started working in tech, and I became the caregiver for my aunt who had dementia, and I had always been interested in sort of accessible tech and making tech accessible for people that have challenges interacting with technology. But I guess when I was the sort of caregiver, I decided that I wanted to change and I wanted to become a speech therapist. So I was close to 40 when I decided to take a step back from technology, even though I never completely took my foot out, and decided to go and to become a speech therapist.
Wow.
So even though I started in tech in 1998, and here we are right now today in 2022, I have worked in tech the whole time. I've been a speech therapist for 3 years. So my start coincided with COVID.
Oh gosh. Oh no.
So I was finishing up.
Well, good for you.
Year. I know, exactly. It was kind of like, the mafia, like just when I think I'm out, they pull me back in, right? So,
yep.
I was finishing up my CF year, and the company that I was working for was developing electronic medical record. And when I started working for them in 2019, the second email I sent was to the tech person to say, like, hey, I like technology.
Yep.
And they're like, yeah, Virginia, focus on your patients. And it's like, I know. But I like technology too.
But just so you know.
Yeah, I like technology too. I'm really interested.
Yep.
And so when COVID hit, they were always planning to do teletherapy. But when COVID hit, the teletherapy platform was accelerated. So they developed, like, the company I work for, so it's Ambiki, we developed our own teletherapy platform and rolled it out in 2020. And what we realized along the way was that a lot of the families and the patients just needed to have a little bit more confidence in their sort of digital literacy skills, which is sort of what brings us to the topic today.
Nice. So this is not about digital literacy, but just out of
Correct.
curiosity. Since you came into the speech world later than most therapists will start off, go through school, go through masters, go right into it. So usually mid 20s. What was it like for you to start the career path at 40 when you're doing your CFY and
So that's a great question. So it was interesting because, you know, when I was taking the GRE,
oh
I did
god.
terrible.
Oh no.
Yeah, it was terrible. It was terrible. And like what I was realizing, I had a lot of like really humbling moments where it was
Mhm.
like, I was like, oh, I haven't taken a math class since 1994. I don't even know what these symbols are. And then I had this realization that the other people that were taking the GRE to get into grad school at the same time as me were born in 1994. And I was
Yeah.
like, oh. And so there was a lot
Yeah.
of made me humble, right? Because there was a
Mhm.
lot where I was in these classes with these really smart people that knew so much that like I'd been working their whole life, right?
Yeah.
Whereas they've been in school and I didn't
Mhm.
know how to be a student anymore.
Yeah.
And they knew how to be a student. And they also had like a really interesting perspective because they were all digital native. And although I'm as
Okay.
close to digital native as you can be for someone that's my age, I'm
Mhm.
not.
Yeah.
And but like things that would happen, it was just really interesting because even in that, this actually does bring it back to digital literacy. Like even in that, the way that we would approach technology and the way that we would bring technology into our sessions was
Mm.
really different. And I think
Mhm.
that a lot of that was based on our comfort level with technology,
Yeah.
And so I also think one thing that was really frustrating for me that probably was not as frustrating for my classmates was data collection. And
Mm.
I felt like all the data collection that we did that is like so important and you're trying so hard to make it accurate, but then like you put it in like your system or like your handwritten note or whatever, and it goes absolutely nowhere. Right.
Yep.
And that was really frustrating for me. Right.
Uh-huh.
So there were a lot of things like that I think were a unique challenge for me.
Yeah. And especially having like the technology background, like I feel like if we would have been in the same class, like I'm not technologically savvy. So like the fact that I'm doing a
That's not true.
podcast, like
I don't believe that.
I have the ability to learn, but
Yes.
like if someone like my grandparents, they're always like, "Natalie, like you're young, like fix this." And I'm like, I don't I don't know. Like I'm going to sit and do the same thing you are of pressing buttons and try and like I might be able to problem solve a little bit better and be like, "Oh, like I know the settings like might have this or whatever it is," where they might not even do that. But I'm like, really, of like all the grandchildren you come to, like you come to me and like I do the bare minimum. Like, so the fact now I'm like in the podcast world, I'm like, this is mind blowing. Like, I'm gonna kill it. Like,
But
I'm
the
gonna do
thing is
great.
that, well, like what you're saying though is like you're like, well, I don't know a lot about technology, but like I might have an idea of where I should go to look for something, or like I might just
Mm-hmm.
like I'm just gonna do the same things you're doing. I'm just gonna try it. But the thing is that they asked you, they didn't try it. You
Mm-hmm.
did try it,
Yep.
right? And so that's the difference, right? And so
Oh yeah.
what happens with technology is that people think I'm gonna break it, right? And if
Mm-hmm.
you break it, just turn it off and then turn it back on because you probably didn't break it. You probably just like messed it up for a second, right? But like,
Yeah.
I mean, turning it off and on like solves a lot of problems, right?
Yep.
And we all know that, And so, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think oftentimes it's just sort of like being willing to try. So, we're
Yeah.
talking about some of the principles of digital literacy, right?
Yeah.
So the first one is confidence using computers. The second
Mm-hmm.
one is the ability to get new technology to work. So
Yeah.
like you are like when your grandparents come and they ask you for help, you're like, I don't know, but I'm gonna try, right? So
Yep.
it's the first two, right? So the use of digital tools for learning. So, you are
Mm-hmm.
using digital tools to learn now because you're putting together this podcast. And I imagine that you don't just inherently know how to do everything that you
No.
want to do for your podcast, right?
For sure not.
And then like you also have to be able to sort of determine the trustworthiness of information that you get online. So
Mm,
I imagine
mm-hmm,
that you're getting more and more savvy as you're like looking at things and as people are proposing topics to you and you're sort of saying like, is this something that like clinically I think is the right thing? And is this something
mm-hmm.
that I want to be promoting on something that's associated with me? And
Yeah.
then I think the sort of like the fifth principle that's a part of digital literacy, which I think is probably the biggest stretch, and that's like the familiarity with ed tech terms. Like, so like the terms that people talk about when they talk about like education technology. And I think that you can be
Mm-hmm.
digitally literate without necessarily knowing a lot about education technology.
Yeah.
But I think if you're confident in using computers, if you are willing to try to get things to work, if you are using digital tools for learning, and if
Mm-hmm.
you are able to determine whether or not information is trustworthy, then you are a digital literate person. And you
Yeah.
are doing all the things that you need to do, all the evaluation criteria.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. So, kind of, let's go back. Like, what is digital literacy? So, for people that have not like heard that term before, because I know I first read it and I was like, oh, reading books digitally, like
Yeah,
digital
yeah.
literacy. But I soon came to find out like that's not it. I mean, slightly, but not what I thought it was.
Yeah, yeah, it is a real thing, and it's something that like the Pew Research Center has been tracking for years. There's whole organizations that are dedicated to this,
Mm-hmm.
but it's sort of digital literacy is the idea that if you are going to be able to participate in technology or be able to participate in sort of the world that the internet brings us, then you need to be confident that you can,
Mm-hmm.
and you need to be sort of willing to try. And so like the sort of like layman's version, like I went over sort of the points that go with it, but like really I would say the most sort of layman's easy way to explain it is digital literacy is the ability to feel confident that you can make something that is new technology work the first time that you try it.
Mm-hmm.
So like without having
Yeah.
to read an instruction manual, just
Okay.
like intuitively, like you can look at it and you can kind of start to figure out like what it is that you need to do.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, and like, and I mean, we were talking about it a little beforehand too, of just like how prevalent it is now in not only like our world as like the 2020s, um but just like in the therapy world too, like boom cards and all of these like online platforms that it's not like you go to like teachers pay teachers for like school kids and stuff, and there's just all these things, and like people have them as side gigs because like they took the time to like learn all these online things. Because I've tried boom cards too, and it's definitely time consuming, and then it kind of reached the point where I'm like, oh, like I have to go down this path instead, and like I might pick it up later on, like I still have the basis of it, but I'm also not as creative of a person, so like to make a whole thing come out of my head, I'm like, I'll maybe do like, oh, here's some supplement material to books. Then I don't have to make too much up. But yeah, it's so relevant now as just like our world is evolving, as therapy is revolving, and like the amount of telehealth platforms now that there's businesses solely doing telehealth. And I think now with, I don't know, I feel like we are increasing in speech pathologists. Like we're always growing in numbers, but I also feel like the amount of, especially autism, the amount of individuals now obtaining that diagnosis and becoming more aware of speech therapy and how it can relate to that. Like we don't have the means to see all these people. So that's where telehealth is so nice, because I know Vegas, we're so short staffed of speech therapists, but the fact that there's online platforms that they can reach out to if they're comfortable with it, and or if they're willing to learn and be like, my child, they just really need services, and like the in-home places aren't working right now, so we need to find that backup plan. um
Well, yeah, I will say that one of the things when March of 2020 hit, and there were guidelines about who you should try teletherapy with, and
mhm,
it was sort of like one of those things where it was like, you should try it with this audience, or you should try it with these this population and this population, maybe not so much this population, but we
Yeah.
didn't know how long we were going to be out. And so
Mm-hmm.
there, just like with AAC, like there should be no barriers to entry. It was
Yeah.
kind of like, because everything was just leveled, it was like, I don't think it's going to work with this patient, but I have to try, because otherwise there's going to be nothing. There's going to be no services, right? And so you
Mm-hmm.
have to just at least try. And I know I did have like, I had a 2-year-old that I did tons of teletherapy with. She loved it. She loved
Yeah.
technology. So she was like really receptive to it.
Mm-hmm.
And we had a lot of things in our teletherapy platform that was like some different reactions and stuff that would sort of like bring her back and sort of keep her engaged and stuff. She loved it.
Yeah.
I also had a middle school student who used technology a lot, but he was more it was like more he used it to sort of pass time. He wasn't very
Mm.
confident when hit with his abilities to like try things out. Like he wasn't necessarily very digital literate, although he had a lot
Yeah.
of screen time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I found, I wasn't sure how it would go with him, but one of the things I found was I got like, I don't know, quadruple the amount of engagement that I got when I was doing it via teletherapy than I was in person, because all
Mm.
of a sudden I was in his favorite device. And so
Yeah. Uh-huh.
it was like he was looking at me and his iPad, which is what he was more comfortable looking at anyway. And so it just
Mm-hmm.
made it easier for him. Like he had great eye contact. Like we were able to stay focused. He would stay more engaged, because
Yeah.
it was almost like he had an interactive iPad. I mean, an iPad is interactive, but like I
Yeah.
was responsive to what he was saying in a way
Mm-hmm.
that like other things that he was engaging with were not. And so it was exciting to see that
Yeah.
sort of thing happen.
Oh gosh, yeah. And it's so funny, like you say, a 2-year-old was very engaged because like I did telehealth with early intervention, and for the most part, like they wouldn't be, but you did have a couple of those that like they're very engaged, and they were like you'd play like videos and like be talking it to them. And I had one kiddo that he was a very slow progress kiddo. So like anything he did, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is amazing. But we'd like just go through a video because like you said, he was very much into screen time. He loved like videos, and I was like, okay, I just need to incorporate the videos into our sessions. Like he's basically nonverbal, and like he won't attend to like boom cards or anything I bring up. I tried, but he just couldn't do it. So I was like, okay, here's a video. And I would literally probably stop it like 15 times throughout this like 45-second video. And then I would be waiting like, should we do more? Like more video? And like trying to get him. And he would be like sitting there signing and like to do more. And I think that's one hard thing, especially now, I think with parenting styles and this population, that all these kids are born during COVID, so they've only really known technology. But we're also like, oh, don't do much technology because you need to go out and play. Like, remember when we were kids and we would play and
I
all
know.
of that. And
I
it's like,
know.
there's a healthy balance. Like, I think we need to embrace technology because
Yeah,
it's here to
I
stay.
do. I think you have to do both, right? You have to play
Yep.
outside without technology, and then you have to also. And I think what I hope that the change, and this is something that like I hope will be a trend, sort of coming out of the COVID years,
Mm-hmm.
is that sort of like that patient that I was talking about, that like it was screen time, he was just passively consuming media,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like students today are more active participants than they were pre-COVID. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it's because they had to be, right? Just like how we
Yeah.
had to be. And one of the things that you and I were talking about before we got on was like in those early COVID days, you and the patient were figuring it out together. Like you were doing
Mm-hmm.
teletherapy together for the first time, and you had to
Yep.
kind of you have that joy and you have that frustration sort of together. And
Mm-hmm.
I think as therapists, we always think that we have to have the answer.
Yeah.
We are the professional, we're the person that's sort of like training. But when it comes to technology, if we can sort of like embrace the like, let's see what happens, or like
Yep.
embrace the sort of exploration of it, and to sort of let the like our student or our patient see that when we interact with technology too, it also doesn't always go the way that we expect it to,
Mm-hmm.
but that we take a moment, we think through what's not doing what we want it to do, and we figure it out. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of like that the skills that we pick up as we interact with technology, and as we start to notice like different design patterns and stuff like that, that helps you participate in the world. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't know what it's like in Vegas. I imagine Vegas is probably more sophisticated than Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where I live. But when you go to a restaurant now, you use a QR code to get the
Yeah.
menu. And
Mm-hmm.
that didn't happen a whole lot before COVID,
Oh,
right?
no. Like, that was unheard of to,
Right.
like, even QR codes, I feel like weren't even really prevalent before COVID. Like, you kind of knew what it was, but you're like, I don't see it anywhere. Like, and now it's like, yeah, wherever you go, if you're going to a restaurant, if you're going to, I know I've been to like concerts or something that you like do a QR code, or city, like government facilities and stuff will have like, oh, here's how to get to this website. Or business cards. I've even seen like business cards can now have like a QR code where you can go straight. And I'm like, I'm mind blown. I was
Yeah,
like,
and see,
wow.
that's like one of the things that we don't think of as a. There are very few positives when it comes to COVID. Like,
Yeah.
let's go ahead and get that out there. But that is
Uh-huh.
actually one thing that is a positive. The technology was ready for us. It
Yeah.
was there.
Mm-hmm.
It was ready for us. We, as a population, weren't ready for it. And,
Yeah.
we should resist it. We shouldn't just I am a person that embraces technology, but even I think it's really important to, have times where you're not engaging with technology at all, or like times where you put it
Mm-hmm.
aside and you just have that real moment where you're sort of engaging with someone.
Yeah.
And, I had done a tiny bit of teletherapy before the pandemic, and I was definitely more of the mindset that it should be in person,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, for sure. Mm-hmm.
But now I think it's best when it's a mixture.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you get different things out of different types of sessions. I think
Oh, yeah.
there are reasons to do in-person sessions. There are reasons to do teletherapy sessions, and I think
Mm-hmm.
a good mix is sort of what's typically best for the therapist and also for the patient. So
Oh, yeah.
especially with the shortages that we have kind of across
Mm-hmm.
the nation, especially in
Yeah.
some of the rural communities.
Oh, gosh. Yeah. Yeah. It is it's definitely like person by person. Like, okay, like this, like you said, like this kiddo does best on the iPad. Like, this is what they're comfortable with. And I know being, I was previously in early intervention, and like you'd show up and like you're trying to get this like 1.5-year old to interact with you. Like, and we were more like parent coaching. So we would go in like once a month. And it's just like, you can build rapport with the family, but it's really hard with the kids. So like almost telehealth was easier in that aspect, because it's like, okay, like I'm parent coaching with the parent right now, and this kiddo is doing everything they do during the day. They don't even know. Well, some of them did, and they'd be like, "Oh, look, a person." But some of them like that would be clammed up and like not talk, not do anything, just cry during our whole session because there's a new person. Like, I was able to see them in their daily
Mm-hmm.
life and be like, oh,
Yes.
like with eating, like that's what they're eating. When I came last time, like they wouldn't touch anything because they cried. Like, and it's definitely, yeah, like you said, like COVID, for the most part, 90% of it was awful, and it was
Yeah,
something I would
yeah.
never want to go through again. But also coming out of it and being like, look at these things that we learned. Like, look at these things, and like just how we are transitioning as even like a speech pathology field. And we are doing more of like the online stuff. We are like being able to help, and we can do that telehealth stuff for the rural communities that don't have an SLP for 50, 100 miles. Like, because I think we also need to get to the point of like everyone deserves therapy no matter where they live. And like,
Yes,
it's really
yes.
hard to tell them, like, yeah, I mean, you can, but you gotta drive 100 miles to like get to me, kind of thing. where it's like just
Yeah.
presenting that is an easy way to do it. And I mean, we can do it. Like I had a friend who was online because we were COVID, and then went in person, and she like decided, and she's like, nah, like working from home, that's my like I need to do. So she's like solely doing teletherapy now because she's like, I loved it. I loved like the relationships I formed there. I loved being able to even I was working from home and it was great. And and it's like people like would she have found that out if all of this hadn't happened? Like
Yeah, she might not have been willing to try,
mm-hmm.
like, and
Yeah.
that's not like any sort of like mark against her. It's like the opportunity wasn't there. It wasn't as
Mm-hmm.
ubiquitous, like maybe she would have been willing to try it, but she wouldn't have had the employment opportunities for that to happen. And so,
Yeah.
like there were a lot of things that were in place. And so, honestly, when you look at the US, we were set up for this pretty well. Now, I know I was working in Tennessee when the pandemic happened, and we had a lot of students that had really that were in really rural communities. And one of the things that like at some point there was like an infrastructure problem, whereas if you're looking at like these rural communities in like sort of northeastern Tennessee, which is where I was,
Mm-hmm.
when they were laying the pipes for the internet, they prioritized schools and places that had sort of
Mm.
large masses of people and where they would expect for a lot of internet usage to be happening, right? So
Yeah.
they had like all these huge, and I'm using the word pipes like, just sort of informally, but you had all these huge pipes going into a school, but then no
Mm-hmm.
one was there. Everything was distributed, right? And so the whole
Yeah.
infrastructure just didn't work. And you had all these kids that were in sort of the mountains of Tennessee where there just wasn't a whole lot that you were going to be able to do because there wasn't a lot of Wi-Fi access. There wasn't a lot of just
Yeah.
like sort of land cables getting out there. And so, those kids that maybe would have gone to the library to have a session with you previously because even driving to their house would have been sort of perilous or difficult, then that wasn't even an option. So,
Mm-hmm.
so like we say that we were in a good place, and that's true for a lot of people. When I say like the technology was in a good place,
Yeah.
but there were so many barriers to access, and lots of families didn't have a device or they didn't have the internet. And then maybe if the family, even if the therapist had the technical skills, maybe the family didn't have the technical skills. And all of those
Mm-hmm.
things just became more obvious. And so that digital divide that we were talking about, it just became bigger. Like it was bigger before, and then it became even bigger then.
Yeah.
But, I think it happened for such a long period of time that, like your friend, we just had more people that maybe those barriers would have maybe deterred them from doing it in the past. Now they're like, well, let's try it. Let's see if this
Mm-hmm.
will work. This hasn't worked, so let's see something else. So,
Yeah. Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, it is it's an amazing tool. And I don't know if you have recommendations of like things you've worked with, but I know with telehealth and speech services, you have the HIPAA compliance.
yeah,
Do you have any recommendations of like good platforms that would be HIPAA
yeah.
compliant? That's
I just happened to work for one. So, so like I mentioned, I was working in the schools when COVID hit. Then the company I was working for, they were developing an electronic medical record internally
mm-hmm.
for the organization, and they sort of accelerated their teletherapy. So for I don't know, I guess for about 2 years after COVID started, so up until about January this year, the platform was just for the organization that started it, which was Sidekick Therapy Partners, which is in Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that we noticed is when we were posting pictures of like our therapists working with other therapists on our teletherapy platform, people were like, "Oh, I don't recognize that one," and people were asking us questions about it. And so
Yeah.
we took our platform public, and so we launched in January. So and Vicky is the company that I work
Oh
for,
wow. Like January
and
2022.
January 2022.
Ah, real brand new.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
awesome.
it's very brand new. And and Vicky is sort of four things. So one of the things that's really important is HIPAA compliant group teletherapy.
Okay.
It's HIPAA compliant, and it has all the tools that you need to sort of like run therapy built in, so that you can sort of have all the materials that you're using and just display them like right in your teletherapy session.
Mm-hmm.
We also have therapy tools, because if you're going to be doing therapy, then you need to have the tools to be able to do it. So we have like, a goal bank, and we have like a bunch of different resources,
Oh,
and
wow.
like a resource calendar and things like that.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
and then we also have like a way, so like as we interact with our patients, like if I have 10 kids on my caseload that I'm working with that are using the autism diagnosis code, then I am able to like sort of see that like, these types of like, I can look at sort of my own personal metadata and sort of see that like this type of thing works really well with this type of population. And so I can sort of
Mm.
like begin to build my expertise by like making more materials and putting them on the site and saying these work really well with my population, and that sort of
Oh my
thing.
gosh, that's phenomenal.
Yeah, and we're still like, we developed our electronic medical record for Sidekick, but now we're sort of decoupling that from their business and making
Yeah.
one so that anybody can use it. So that,
Mm.
when I have my therapy session with a patient, whether it's via teletherapy or it's in person, and I'm interacting with that patient and I'm using technology to interact with them, however I'm doing it, whether it's the patient doing it or if I'm sort of doing things along the way, it'll start to write my note for me. So that's sort of
Oh
like
gosh.
where we're building things. So
Oh, that's amazing. And for sure, I mean,
it's
for this to be like a
exciting.
promoting part, but like, my
Yeah.
gosh, like that. So, okay. Now, I have another question. Um,
Yes.
so with you were saying, oh my God, I'm blanking on the question now. So I might have to come back to that.
No worries.
But yeah, that is an incredible system that it is geared towards therapy. Because that was going to be another question of
Yes.
mine of like, okay, like that was one of my barriers with telehealth is like, okay, like I have the kiddo here. I figured out the digital part of it. We're both here. We're both talking. We can hear each other. Like,
Mm-hmm.
but what do
But
I
now what do I do?
use? Like,
Yeah,
now
exactly. No,
next step,
exactly.
like, because I know in the beginning there was like not a lot of stuff, and now I feel like there's so much. So like the fact that your guys' site kind of narrows it in on like, okay, like here's a child like with this diagnosis, like these have worked for other people, or and do you do
Yes.
ages too, like separate them by age?
So, like, we're really geared towards the school age.
Mm-hmm.
There is some stuff for early intervention. There is some stuff for adults, but we're starting with what we know,
Yeah.
and like the platform is like building all the time. But like, so the idea is if you are working with patients that are school age, whether you're doing it in person or you're doing it via teletherapy, you'll be able to find stuff for you.
Yeah.
And I think just like how we were talking about how I like to do both in person and sort of teletherapy.
Mm-hmm.
I also want my materials to be able to work in both environments. And so,
Yeah.
I might engage with them on we have a whiteboard where you can sort of pull things up and then the patient can sort of engage with it. And then we also
Mm-hmm.
have like a click beacon so that I can see what they're doing without giving them remote access. Because on Zoom, if you give them remote access, you're actually giving them access to your computer, which breaks HIPAA, right?
Yeah.
So
Oh, I
by
didn't even
having
think about that. Oh my
it
gosh.
does. Yeah,
Oh my
yeah.
gosh. Oh god.
So, but it's okay because you didn't break HIPAA, because the
Mm-hmm.
HIPAA sort of gave like a stay for the
Yeah.
period of the pandemic, just because we had to sort of get things done, and so it was kind of
Yeah.
okay. But sort of moving forward, that will be something that we'll have to all pay attention to, right?
Yeah. I
And
would
so,
have never even thought like I mean, I don't know. Half the time I couldn't even figure out remote access, and like the other half time I'm like the kids aren't gonna do it. I would like so all the activities are like here's what I'm doing. Like but yeah,
but
I wouldn't
see,
have even thought of that.
that's the whole thing. Like, so the thing is, so this is the bad thing about technology and how much technology is advanced is that um, technology is so easy to use oftentimes that sometimes we don't understand the ramifications of what we're doing. So like just
Mm-hmm.
like how you were saying, like it never occurred to you that you were giving remote access to your desktop by giving the kid remote access, and that was
Yeah.
breaking HIPAA compliance. Like there's a lot of sort of like sites that use like tracking pixels, right? And did you see the whole
Mm-hmm.
Facebook thing where like the the
Yeah.
healthcare organizations like hospitals and stuff, the tracking pixel was sending all this stuff to Facebook, like the prescriptions that you have and all this sort of stuff. Facebook doesn't even know that stuff,
No.
right? And so,
Mm-mm.
keeping all of that stuff like so protected is so important, and
Mm-hmm.
we can't expect. So this is me speaking as a technologist, not necessarily as a speech therapist, although this is something I firmly believe as a speech therapist. But as a technologist, we can't expect people that are interacting with technology to understand what everything that they're doing does, because it's
Mm-hmm.
technical and it's confusing. But
Yeah.
we have to be judicious that we are protecting the privacy of anybody that's interacting with technology, to make sure
Mm-hmm.
that we are not exposing them. We are not sort of getting more information than we need. We're not doing anything that would, break HIPAA compliance. Like, we're able to take the anonymized data that we need and be able to help make therapeutic advances, without sort of tying it back to an individual patient or even an individual therapist. So
Yeah.
it's really important to take all that stuff into consideration whenever you're designing something.
Oh gosh.
So
Oh, for sure. See, I told you before we even came on that I would be learning like all the things. And I'm just sitting here and I'm like, oh my God, like I don't do this anymore. Like I'm not, haven't done teletherapy in a hot minute, but yikes. Like, and luckily during COVID, I think there was a lot of like leniency of like, okay, we're just providing services, like provide it as well as you can. Cause I mean, also like we talked about like during COVID, I was meeting with parents all the time because we'd be going online, we'd be going hybrid, we'd be going all in person, back online. Oh, now we're going to change from Google Meet to Zoom. Like we're doing all these things and having to like communicate it to parents. And half the time I'm like, why? Like, explain to me why we're doing this. Like, why can't we do Google Meet anymore? Why are we going? And I think, yeah, just was going into like, okay, like we learned that Google Meet wasn't as HIPAA compliant as Zoom. So now we need to transfer over and just make sure. And we were all learning, like all of us
right,
down doing the therapy, everybody up above us that was kind of providing this to us. Um, None of us really knew. So it was kind of a hectic little bit, but now like we have that knowledge to, and I mean, a lot of these platforms too, I feel like have transform themselves too. So they're a lot easier to use. They're a lot more, like, I feel like there's a lot more HIPAA compliant ones out there that you just kind of have to look to. Cause I mean, I think Zoom, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think like the free version is not HIPAA compliant, but there's like
correct,
a business version you'd have to buy to
correct.
make it business compliant or HIPAA
Yeah,
compliant.
you have to have a BAA, and if you have the BAA with Zoom, then it's HIPAA compliant.
Okay.
And that is something that you have to have a paid version. So, like, one of the things that we did to get around that is, if you create an account on our site, then you have a BAA, so that whether or not you're doing teletherapy, whatever you're
Oh.
doing, you have that BAA there. So even if you have a free account, you're protected, because
Mm-hmm.
that's important. That's the thing. So that's the difference between somebody who has to think about HIPAA as a top priority and someone that
Mm-hmm.
thinks, oh, people in healthcare need it to be HIPAA compliant. Okay. And then they just
Yeah.
sort of like put it in at the end. Right. And so,
Mm-hmm.
so, so going back to sort of like the teletherapy platform, and you were saying like things have gotten so much more easier to use and so much more intuitive, and that sort of thing. And that's true. All of these platforms have gotten better. Zoom, I was using Zoom before the pandemic, but Zoom has gotten a lot better, because so many more people were using it.
Yeah.
But like when we developed our teletherapy platform, we were doing it alongside a bunch of therapists that were doing therapy for the first time. They didn't want to do it, and
Mm-hmm.
they had to do it. And they were occupational therapists, physical therapists, and speech therapists, right? They all have very different needs. And so,
Yeah.
sort of like developing something along the way to make it work for everybody, as we are sort of like,
Mm-hmm.
training them on how to use it, it had to be easy to use, which kind of goes back to a point that you made earlier when you were talking about boom cards and talking about some of the different things that you use in a therapy session. We all know a therapy session goes best when you really know your materials. Because if you really know your materials, you can make magic happen with anything.
Yep.
It could be a language activity, it could be an artic activity, it could be sort of whatever, if you really know your
Yes.
materials. And the issue when COVID hit was that again, this is in some ways it could kind of be a blessing. All of your shortcuts were broken. So you had to
Mm.
start over. You had to think about the way that you did things in a completely
Yeah.
different way, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And so what that meant was like you were sort of like reinventing your own way to do it. So like there are a lot of
Yeah.
therapists that are doing a lot of like green screen therapy, right?
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
And they're doing this like amazing stuff where like they really know their materials. They have it projected on the green screen behind them. They have it
Mm-hmm.
memorized, and they're doing their session like with all like they're not even looking at it. They're because they know their
Yeah.
materials, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
they're able to make this like really incredibly engaging session that's almost like a TV show because
Yeah.
they know their stuff, they know what they want to do, they know their kid, they know how the kid interacts with technology, and so like that sort of stuff is like
Mm-hmm.
pretty exciting. You know, it's exciting to see like what
Oh
people
God.
are able to do and the creativity that comes out of it. You know,
Yeah, I had another friend. She actually just opened a private practice that's completely telehealth. Through I think Florida is where she's licensed. And we lived in Vegas together, so that's kind of how I'd get to see like her sessions and like her materials and stuff like that. And yeah, she loved the green screen. Like she embraced that green screen with everything she had, and like she did phenomenal. Like I didn't do the green screen route. I think I tried it like one or two times, and I'm like, I don't know. I can't do it. But she was amazing because yeah, she would even like make her own screens and
right,
would like
right.
have
But
the
they'll have the
screens.
pajamas to like be a part of the scene that they have on the green screen.
Yeah. And like
Yeah,
she's so like I'm not surprised she's doing like a telehealth because I know she would always be like, oh my gosh, look at this new screen I have. Like oh gosh, she was so excited about it. And I'm like, I want to be that pumped about
I
green
know.
screens. Like,
But see, I'm more like you. I'm more the type that's going to play a video and like stop it and like talk through it, right? Or like
mm-hmm.
I'm more likely to sort of like take the stuff that's like already in the sort of computer and sort of like manipulate
Yeah.
that to make it
Mm-hmm.
happen and to engage with someone. And I guess that's probably because that's the bias I had going into it, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not a weather person, so I don't stand in front of a
Yeah.
green screen very often. And so like when I had to come up with my shortcuts during COVID, I did the stuff that sort of made
Mm-hmm.
more sense to me, right? And
Yeah.
it was more like this is how I interact with technology. And like we mentioned that one patient that like loved to interact with me on his iPad, like that worked really well for him. But you know, for some of the other patients that may have wanted more of a show, that might not have worked as well. You know,
Yeah.
so
Oh, for sure. So I know I've kind of done.
veered off topic.
I'm really good at that.
It's fun.
So with like digital content, like and incorporating into therapy, I know we've kind of already hit on some resources that are good to use with the kiddos, like boom cards, using that green screens, that kind of thing. Do you have any other resources or like websites or something that you were like, oh my gosh, like this was a lifesaver?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, I think our site is pretty good, and Vicky's
Mm-hmm.
pretty good at like providing different resources and stuff like that. I think another thing that's sort of like really important when thinking about like using technology in a speech therapy session is sort of understanding the sort of comfort level that your student has.
Mm-hmm.
I know, like gosh, I can't remember the name of it right now off the top of my head. But like there was a site, I think it might have been education. It was education.com, I'm pretty sure, where
Okay.
they had like they had a game that I would play that would actually teach the kids to code. And so I would use
Oh
that in my
wow.
speech therapy session, and we would use it for. So coding is actually really interesting because it's like descriptive language. You have to be very specific. It's like following directions because you have to be very specific about what you want
Mm-hmm.
the computer to do. And so like the kid has to do a very good job of saying like, you know, take two steps, then turn right, not move
Mm-hmm.
forward, turn right. It has to be take two steps, then turn right. And so
Yeah.
there were tools like that that I would use with different patients depending on like what their different sort of skill level were.
Oh
But
cool.
like Common Sense Media curates a list of like the best apps for learning.
Oh nice.
And they have a digital citizenship curriculum that breaks things down by like topic and grade level. That's a handy tool for therapists, I think. Um, North Star is a digital literacy program, and that's something that you could do if you wanted to try to assess a patient sort of where they are. It would be an informal assessment, but to sort
Mm-hmm.
of like assess what their different skills were to see like how good they were was sort of like if you think about like activities of daily living, well, technology is an activity of daily living now, you know.
Yeah.
So like if
Mm-hmm.
you wanted to try to assess their skills and see what their knowledge is, you could use their program because it looks at essential computer skills, essential software skills, and then using technology in daily life.
Yeah.
And then I mentioned this. So ISTE, which is a program, it's like the International Standard for Technology Educators. They have a curriculum, and
Mm-hmm.
there are other programs that exist that will sort of follow that program. And so if you find something that's following like the ISTE standards or something, then you'll
Mm.
know that they're following valid digital literacy sort of a valid digital literacy practicum, and they're
Okay.
taking into consideration things like it's really important for us to teach our patients how to discern whether or not information they find online is true, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
they have a lot of stuff like that like different stimuli that you could use. Anything that is following ISTE standards will have different stimuli that you can use to help people sort of decode whether or not something
Oh.
that they're presented with is valid or not.
Oh
So
wow.
yeah.
That's so relevant right now. Like I think the good and the bad came out of COVID and technology of like, okay, we have all this new stuff that's come out, all this better stuff, and then brings in all the other things that are like, oh, these people can just kind of say things, and you're always looking like at articles and stuff like that, and you're like, is this true? Like, okay, I need to read it in like five other places before I really
Yeah,
dive
that's one
into
of the.
what this means. Mm-hmm.
If you see something like one of the steps is that you have to find it in at least two other resources and like how you can sort of check to see like what the sources are and stuff. And
That's
when you
awesome.
have to like throw something out if it's not citing something. So it sort of teaches you those skills. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But ASHA, if you are on the ASHA website, they do have information about digital literacy. There's not as much. There's some stuff about using digital text and intervention, which is helpful and is important and it's a good step.
Yeah.
They also have I found a report on social media use and different patterns with with adolescents that have complex communication needs, which is really important. So
Oh.
easy to be misunderstood on social media, right?
Uh-huh.
So we
Yeah.
really need to pay attention to how our children who are even in elementary school, how they're interacting with technology, because they're going to be middle schoolers and high schoolers that have social
Mm-hmm.
media accounts, and people are not going to necessarily understand their way of engaging.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there are a few things like that which I can send you the links of a couple of ASHA things that you could take a look at. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh
those are really
gosh.
cool.
That is all so perfect. I know. Yeah, that's one thing. It's just like, oh, there's so many things out there. Like, what do I narrow down and find? And just being able to have these, and a lot of them, like, I haven't even heard of. I'm like, I did telehealth, and I was like, wait, what is that? Like, it's oh god, it's amazing. Now kind of transitioning. So, accessible tech. I
Mm-hmm.
know you kind of talked to me about that too. What
Mm-hmm.
what is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so accessible tech is how sort of easy it is for someone who has a barrier to be able to access the technology.
Mm-hmm.
So, yes, we could be talking about someone who has a cognitive impairment and they're interacting with technology, and like, are they able to look at something and are they able to be able to discern what they need to do? But you're also talking about someone that's just busy, right? Because when you're
Mm-hmm.
busy, you often will behave the way that you might if you have a language issue. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so accessible tech is sort of like sort of taking sort of ideas and sort of when you're designing technology, making sure that you're designing technology with those sort of principles in mind.
Yeah.
And I'll talk about those in a second. But what I think is important is, when we're talking about sort of the beginning of beginning of the internet, like the beginning of my career in the internet,
Yeah.
it was more about like you just design the solution and then people are just going to come, right? So we
Mm-hmm.
also build a dreams, if you build it, they will come.
Yep.
But like the thing is that like sure they might come, but if they're so frustrated that they can't use it, then they're not going to stay, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so you have to think about those different things. So one thing that's important to understand is that someone who has and I think this is something that like inherently therapists get, is that really an individual that has a disability is really just another version of yourself.
Yeah.
You know what it's like to have a motor impairment if you've ever broken your arm. You
Mm-hmm.
know what it's like to have a language disorder if you've ever been really busy and multitasking when interacting with something.
Yeah.
Like we know those things. Like it's just another sort of version of ourselves. And so when you think about accessible tech, I know like one of the things that we like to think about are that to remember that individuals with disabilities are really just another version of yourself. We always
Mm-hmm.
try to use clear, plain language to let people know what's going to happen when you do something. Like when you click on something, what's going to happen. So we do a lot of like usability testing and user interviews and a lot of just sort of interaction design to make sure that we're thinking about all those things and that people are getting
Yeah.
the expected behavior when they want to. But then you also want to make sure that like whatever you're designing, it works for someone when they have like a sort of when they have a barrier. So like you think about some different tools in the past that have existed. Like I don't know if you remember a few years back, Google Glass. It was
Vaguely.
some glasses. Yeah, there were
Mm-hmm.
glasses that you could put on that would like help you kind of browse the internet, like while you're wearing the glasses. And
Oh yeah.
everybody was like, I don't like, why do I need to be a Silicon Valley person that's just like walking around with internet and my glasses, right?
Yeah.
But like, it's the type of thing that could work really well actually for individuals with disabilities who maybe have motor impairments, right? It could be a
Mm.
new way for them to engage. And so like, one thing that you can start to think about, and I know that most of our audience is not designing technology, but like one thing that's sort of exciting about where we are with technology and where we can go with technology is that when individuals that interact with technology differently engage with it, it actually can help us understand more about what we want to do. And it can actually kind of help
Mm-hmm.
us advance with innovation, right? Like we
Yeah.
all think that we have to access a computer using our hands or using a mouse or using some sort of external thing, but we also know that we have AAC devices that use eye gaze,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
we know what it's like, and we know it's frustrating to use eye gaze technology as an AAC like user.
Yeah.
Um, but if all of us were doing it, it'd get better so much faster, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So like
Oh, for
there's
sure.
opportunities if we stop thinking about those people as people that are like in the fringe and we start thinking of them as like a target audience and as somebody that we should be designing for, because if we can make it a great experience for them, then it should be a great experience for all of us, right? Even the person that
Mm-hmm.
wants to check their email when they're driving, right? Which
Yeah.
is not what we want to be doing. But if you can make it so it's so easy that someone can do that, then
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, and that kind of like reminds me too when you're saying like eye gazing or the eye gaze devices as well as like AAC devices that they are difficult. Like it's for people that don't work with it every day and like are knowledgeable about these things like we are, like we can sit down and have conversations with people that use them because we know how it works, we know like what to expect, and that's like the hard part about bringing it out. And like I mean, when I did early intervention again, we didn't do as many like AAC devices or anything because it was like delayed in language. So we were just like, okay, we just need to build it back up. And we would often go to gestures and like ASL and use that. And like that will help kind of build that gap
Bridge.
between them not speaking and them using full sentences. Like now at least they can tell you a couple words here and there. And I mean, every family is different. Some it works for, some it doesn't. Kids are all different. They pick it up, they don't. But I think like the frustrating part to me is like when you get those families that their reasoning for not doing it is like because their family doesn't use that or whatever it might be. And it's like, we're teaching like a 1.5-year-old how to use this. Like, the least you can do right now is like to learn it as well and just support them in
Just
that.
try it.
And
Yeah.
because we're right now, like, as speech pathologists, like, we aren't here just supporting like verbal language. We are here supporting any type of means to get communication across on how to build that gap between those that have trouble communicating and those that are too busy to kind of stop and like actually communicate, like, where they're just always communicating and then they're like, what did I even say, like. And we're here to bridge that gap, and I think that's a really big takeaway too, is like making sure we're telling everyone about this, not just the one, like. And I know, I think that's where like parent coaching, I'm like, I have grown like so excited, and I love like the parent coaching aspect, because I mean, I can sit here for 30 minutes with a kiddo, work with the device, but like if we don't show mom and dad how to use it, or like, then what's it going to do? Like, you have so many kids that have a device and only use it in your speech room. And it's like,
Well, yeah.
yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So there's two therapists that like your conversation is sort of making me think of, and one of them is Jen, who is behind Drawn to AAC, and she does a lot of drawings of individuals using AAC devices. And one of the things that she had a reminder about the other day, which is like one of these things that you just know but you forget, is like we all use the AAC. A smartphone is an AAC device, right? And so
Yep.
so it's like normalizing that. Like really, we're all using AAC, so we just need to give people that use quote unquote AAC devices. We need to sort of normalize their ability to use all these different things, and we need to give them access to it.
Yeah.
And then another one that I was thinking about is Move with Marcia. So Dr. Marcia, she's actually a physical therapist, and she does a lot about sort of, you know, reminding people that, quote unquote, disability doesn't have a look, right? And so like you actually never know what the person that you're interacting with is like, how they're actually interacting with you.
Yep.
And she does a better job than we do, but I could learn from her.
Yeah.
And doing a lot of like descriptive text in her like Instagram and stuff like that, and doing things to describe like the video for individuals that have visual impairments and that sort of thing. And like just sort of like reminding people like, and another thing, so when talking about accessible tech, so like there's also sort of making tech accessible in that like people have access to it. Like I know at North Carolina, we do have like a assistive technology program that will help to provide technology for individuals with disabilities to kind of help bridge some of those different gaps. And so it's not always AAC devices, it can be different stuff. I know we have a family member who has profound hearing loss, and so like they were providing assistance to us when this individual was going to be going to a doctor's appointment without any sort of familial support in the world of the COVID masks, right? And so some of the different apps and stuff that you could use to like make that sort of stuff a little bit easier to happen. So there are a lot of things that are out there that are available to us that we just have to remember to look for them. And we all have tons of time. We all have so much time to do these things. So that's the barrier, right? So there's the perception issue of like, I can't do tech. And then there's also sort of the time barrier of like thinking that you need a lot of time. But technology is getting better, and it's getting easier to use. And there are a lot more people that are thinking about like designing solutions for individuals that interact with technology in an atypical fashion. So we're getting better.
And I feel like, even because I'm a big multitasker, like I constantly have to do like 4 things at once to feel like I'm productive. And I think especially with like technology, I don't know what makes it different from everything else, but like technology, if I'm trying to multitask with that, like I don't catch on. Like it's just like, I don't know what I'm doing, da da da. And but if I'm gonna sit down and like solely do it, like I can get it out in like 5-10 minutes, and I'm like, man, like I tried doing this for 2 hours yesterday, but I guess, I was doing like X, Y, and Z. And it's just like amazing on how once you just kind of like calm your brain down and you're just like, okay, my goal is to do this. Like, now let's look, and kind of like we talked about before, like, let's look at these things like, all right, well, what area would that be in? Like, what's like keywords if I'm Googling something, like, would be best to, and I mean, you'd adjust that too of like, oh, I don't know. Like, one thing I'm using now is like a free PEX board, like, and being able to like DIY. But like, if I type in PEX board, then you get 150 million things that come up, and you're like, oh, okay, not quite. So then you put in like, oh, I want it to be free. And then still you come up with all these things. And it's just like, it's such a learning curve. But I think if people would just kind of stop and be like, okay, this is what we're trying to do. Like, instead of trying to do this along with everything else I'm doing during the day, like, I could do it a lot faster than if I.
Yeah, it's being intentional, right? So
Mm-hmm.
it's, like we have at our household, um, it'd be very easy for my husband to shame me for the amount of interaction that I do with technology. But instead, we just sort of have like, we don't use technology when we're watching TV, or we
Mm.
don't do it when we don't like watch TV when we're eating dinner, and we don't do those things because like we know that if we're doing both of those things at the same time, we're not going to give it whatever we're doing the attention it deserves, and then we're going to do it for 3 times. And so then all of a sudden you're going to have just watched a bunch of trash on TV and done a terrible job with whatever thing it was that you're trying to do with technology. And so like, it's just like, okay, so now we're going to do this. So we're going to turn off this and then do this for 10 minutes and then do the, go back to it. So just sort of being intentional and sort of like engaging with things like purposefully, right?
Yeah, especially with like the relationships, because I feel like even though technology has brought so many, like, I've loved it. Like, with this podcast, like, the amount of people I'm getting down, being able to sit with that are on the East Coast, on the like Canada, like Australia, and like all these people that it's like, would I have ever met you before if it wasn't for Facebook, if it wasn't for this Google search or whatever it might be, or Instagram or things like that. And I'm like, that's just so wild. But like you said too, like, you have to have those boundaries of like, okay, this is great, but we also need to know, like, I also really love like personal experiences and being able to be with people, be present with them, and yeah, have meals without a phone, or yeah, not watch TV while you're eating. Like, every once in a while it's like a football game, like, you obviously have to like have the smorgasbord, watch it, whatever it is. Movie night, have your popcorn, watch TV, like, it happens. But I think, yeah, being very intentional about that, because it has become such a prominent part. And I think if we use it correctly and we are smart about it and intentional about it, like, we could go so many places. But
it's true.
It's, yeah, I mean, there's so much to like scrolling, like, oh, I just spent like 4 hours on TikTok kind of thing, that has become like more relevant. And it's like, oh, let's take a couple steps back.
I know. It's so funny, like, because whenever there's a new sort of social media thing, we have to figure out how we use it, And so, like, what I've been thinking lately, and I don't know if this is right or not, but this is sort of what I'm thinking, is that like TikTok's more for discovery, and then like if I find somebody I like on TikTok, then I'll go and follow them on Instagram.
Yeah.
And then I don't have to go to TikTok as much, right? And so it's like it's like I'll use sort of like TikTok almost as like a discovery engine, right? And then like Instagram is like, Instagram's where our relationship lives.
Yeah, I have like one person on TikTok that two people I follow on TikTok, and that's it. I'm like, I can't do more. I can't. Like, there's nothing else. But awesome. Do you have anything that we haven't covered with accessible technology or digital literacy that you wanted to put out there that you're really hoping to say?
No, I mean, I think this has been really fun. It's been a fun conversation and fun sort of like catching up and like getting to know each other. And I think, I guess maybe the biggest thing that I would love for people to walk away with, if you're a speech language pathologist and you're listening to this, is, you are more technical than you think you are. And just because there's typically someone in your social circle that is more tech savvy than you are, you think knows more than you do, just give it a shot and just be willing to try it, because when you try, then you get the opportunities to sort of explore and to like you get there's and I think this is true with our patients too, like, and with our students, is that like if you're always using technology for like a purpose, even if it's scrolling on Instagram, right? If you always
Mm-hmm.
have it for like a purpose, then you don't really sort of get the opportunity to take advantage of all the things that it can bring. And so I think it's sort
Yeah.
of like thinking about like looking at things a little bit differently and looking at how maybe you could use it in a novel way to get what you want out of it. So
Yeah.
just be
Oh,
open.
100%. I agree with all that. Awesome. Awesome. Well, to round off, a book. Is there a book that
Yes.
you would recommend to everybody and anybody that is near and dear to
Yeah.
you?
So I would say like I read over the years. I've read a lot of books about like technology and sort of the way that we interact with it. And
Mm-hmm.
one that I think about a lot is this book that's called Mismatch. And Mismatch is good because what it does is it talks about how I don't remember the name of the author right now. Her name is Holmes, and
Okay.
Mismatch is it talks about how like oftentimes when you're interacting with technology, there is like a mismatch between what the designer intended for it to do and then what you as a user expect to happen. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason why we don't like that is because it's processed in the same part of our brain as physical pain is. And so when we like
Yeah.
experience like this sort of like design mismatch, we experience physical pain, right? And that's why
Oh.
people get
Mm-hmm.
deterred from continuing to try different things. And so
Wow.
I think it's a really good book to kind of help sort of change your perspective and make you sort of willing to like explore things because you're like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, it's not because I'm like quote unquote stupid or it's not because I don't know technology. It's just because the person was doing, they were designing something that didn't make sense for what I want to do. Right. And so you
Yeah.
can just kind of like, it helps you kind of reframe your relationship with technology. So I think that that's a good book
Oh, wow.
to check out. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah.
gosh.
I like
Yeah,
that one a lot.
that's and I feel like that can even like even though it's like technology based, I feel like it can be used for anything. Like just being able to be
Absolutely.
open-minded and be able to look at that mismatch and see how to like whether it's verbally communicating, whether it's with writing or anything like that. Like there's always such a
Because that's
need.
what we, yeah, that, I mean, that's what we do as speech pathologists, right? Like we're
Mhm.
like fixing, we're helping our patients overcome a mismatch, right? We're helping them
Yep.
overcome sort of barriers in communication, right? And
Mhm.
so technology is really just another tool for communication. So
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Virginia, for coming on today. This was such a pleasure. I had a blast. I learned so much.
well, thank you
And
so
I
much. I'm
learned I'm
excited to
capable.
be here. You are. You can do it. You can do
I
it.
am not,
See, look at you. You have a podcast. You're
I
editing
know.
video or editing audio. Like you're doing all sorts of things that you didn't know you would be doing.
Yep. Now
So
my grandparents
you
are
can
going
do
to
it.
listen to this and be like, okay, Natalie, you need to fix my phone. I'm like, I will
No, their
try.
takeaway should be that they can try it. They can try to
It's true.
interact with it.
Be like, I'll watch you. I'll talk you through a
Exactly.
couple things. Like,
Tell me what you think will happen if you click on that button.
yep. I love that. Well, thank you so much, Virginia.